300-pound dudes tackling you on a frozen field, the last thing you want to do is stay out there. Believe me, the Rams players were thinking about the jacuzzi at their team hotel, that they find it laughable, but more laughable if they totally disregard the trade whatsoever. This guy has transformed the balance of power in the Eastern Conference. And you could argue the entire defense is going to be absolutely ferocious next year. But if your number one priority is to win a Super Bowl, then J.J. Watt is making a grave mistake. To ride this Chad Henne experiment for an entire game, I might need a whole bottle of Hennessy just to get through that. Guy who's won 8 division titles, who's made 5 AFC championship appearances, who's reached the Super Bowl 3 times and has won 2 Super Bowls for this organization. Aaron Rodgers has only won 1 Super Bowl with Green Bay. Drew Brees has only won 1 Super Bowl with New Orleans. There's only 13 quarterbacks in NFL history that have won multiple Super Bowls, and Big Ben is one of those individuals. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe right here on J&J Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube. I'm Jonah Malkin with you every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Hope you all had a lovely Father's Day yesterday. A lot to unpack in sports. The NBA playoffs not only in full swing, matchups crystallized, teams eliminated, history made, both on and off the court. This was a fantastic weekend of basketball filled with 2 tremendous Game 7s that I'll touch on. History in LA for the Clippers, and Jon Rahm becoming the first Spanish golfer to win the U.S. Open. I'm going to react to that. The PGA Championship took place yesterday. A huge performance. So much fun to unpack, but I have to start with the NBA playoffs. One of the 2 Game 7s, the Brooklyn Nets and the Milwaukee Bucks. This was the marquee matchup Saturday night. What I predicted would be perhaps the best series of this postseason. Now, obviously, we were robbed of some tremendous one-on-one matchups, and these teams were not evenly matched in the sense that both teams were at full capacity, were at full strength. But I will say this, the Game 7 itself delivered an absolutely beautiful performance. The Game 7 itself was an absolutely sensational finish, and fortunately for us as basketball fans, it provided every single ingredient and aspect needed for a good Game 7. The 2 best players on the 2 teams played their best games of the season. They played absolutely fantastically. Giannis, 40 points, 13 rebounds, 5 assists, 15 of 24 from the floor, 2 of 6 from the three-point line. I know that percentagely, that's not a great percentage, but for him, he attempted those shots. He made it. 8 for 14 from the free throw line. Durant on the other end, 48 points was fantastic. 9 rebounds, 6 assists. The guy had to shoot 36 times, and he made 17 of them. 4 of 11 from the three-point line, 10 of 11 from the free throw line. Those 2 guys were battling down the stretch. This was an absolutely sensational finish, an overtime win for the Milwaukee Bucks to advance to the Eastern Conference Finals with the victory a couple nights ago. And this is something that I've noted about the Milwaukee Bucks, that everyone has noted about the Milwaukee Bucks. The amount of pressure that's been exerted from the outside onto this team, that's been heaped onto this team, was astronomical. Because the Milwaukee Bucks, while they had everything to gain from winning this series, they also had everything to lose. You look at the landscape right now in the NBA. In the Western Conference, you had the defending champions, the Lakers, with a injured Anthony Davis and a hobbled LeBron James. They go out in the first round of the Phoenix Suns. Kawhi Leonard now is down for the count with the Clippers for the time being. So the West seems wide open, seems very vulnerable. Chris Paul's in health and safety protocols. We're not sure exactly what his return timeline is. Then you stay within your own conference, and you look at the Eastern Conference, and at the time of Game 7, we didn't know what the outcome would be between the Hawks and the Sixers. So you're saying to yourself, well, Philadelphia's on the ropes in a 7-game series against the Hawks. And then even against my own opponent and my adversary in the Brooklyn Nets, Kyrie Irving gone with a sprained ankle. James Harden suffered what we later knew to be a grade 2 hamstring strain, but he clearly was a shell of himself, wasn't playing well at all, could barely move, was immobile. And this is the golden opportunity against a shorthanded, undermanned Brooklyn Nets team. You're the Milwaukee Bucks. You do not have a better chance. You were given an opportunity on a golden platter handed to you. And I talk all the time about how championship teams need to be a bit auspicious, have to be a little bit fortunate, have some fortuitous bounces. You have to have some breaks en route to a championship. And this was it. The Milwaukee Bucks had everything right in front of them. But if they were to lose to this team, not only would Giannis get shredded, not only would Mike Budenholzer lose his job, I think that this was the last chance for the Milwaukee Bucks, this iteration of the Milwaukee Bucks with Giannis Antetokounmpo at the forefront and his supporting cast to win an NBA championship. I thought this was the year. Because if you lose this year to the Brooklyn Nets, who are, again, undermanned, next year they're only going to come back stronger, most likely, with better chemistry. So this is going to be a much more difficult team to beat moving forward. This was the year to pounce on them, to exploit that mismatch and take advantage of the health situation. And everything was riding on this. This was the bottom of the ninth, 2 outs, 2 strikes on Giannis, Budenholzer, and this entire Bucks organization. So if you lose this game Saturday night, our legacy, the legacy that we used to sum up Giannis Antetokounmpo and this iteration of the Bucks, we're absolutely killing them today. Because those are the games that you should be winning. And so the other thing is that outlook would just be so grim moving forward. It would be in so much question, the validity about Giannis, anything that he's been able to accomplish, everything that he's done up until this point would have been in question. And now with this victory, the sea is parted. The Red Sea is parted for him. The Western Conference is vulnerable. The Eastern Conference is now Bucks versus the Atlanta Hawks, and I'll touch on that other game in the Eastern Conference in a second. And it provided everything down the stretch, back and forth, and KD was phenomenal in regulation. I mean, his shot down the stretch of regulation to tie the game with that tough turnaround from basically the three-point line, if not for his foot stepping on the line, to tie the game at 109. If his foot is just literally 2 inches back behind the three-point line, that's a walk-off game winner, and it caps off what was another historical performance from Kevin Durant with 48 points, scored 49 in the Game 5 win at the Barclays Center. And hitting that just impossibly tough shot over PJ Tucker would have been a perfect way to put the bow tie on this series, and you would have just chalked it up to Kevin Durant heroics. Kevin Durant just being Kevin Durant, closing out this series, and he scored 8 final points, the final 8 points for the Brooklyn Nets over the 2-11 stretch in the fourth quarter. He was obviously gassed in the overtime. He was 0 for 6. He couldn't hit anything. He did not get help from Joe Harris. James Harden, as I talked about, yes, he scored technically 22 points, 9 rebounds, 9 assists, but was 5 for 17 from the floor, 2 for 12 from the three-point line. His three-point shooting struggles and woes have continued and persisted in the postseason. Again, he was dealing with that hamstring injury and strain. But this is what I think about with the Brooklyn Nets. And again, we were so deprived of a healthy matchup, of a full matchup that it's such a shame. I still believe that if the Brooklyn Nets were fully healthy, had their full squad, their full platoon of guys, that they would have won this series in 6 games. But again, you have to be a bit fortunate. The Milwaukee Bucks were, and I think that this can be potentially a franchise-altering win for the Milwaukee Bucks, because this might be a championship. Now they're primed to win a championship. 76ers are gone. Brooklyn Nets are gone. It's just the Atlanta Hawks and the winner between the Phoenix Suns and the Clippers without Kawhi at the moment. And I think if you're Milwaukee, you're saying to yourself that this is the best chance right now that we're going to have. LeBron James is out in the West. This is the best chance we're going to have to win an NBA championship. And the fact that they were able to overcome that hurdle was not only huge psychologically, but I think emotionally there was an emotional lift. And that proverbial monkey was finally off the back of Giannis being able to come up big in a Game 7 on the road. That's the other piece of it, and this is the final takeaway, is at the end of the day, you have to win a Game 7 on the road. And I don't care where the venue is being played, you win a Game 7 on the road in the NBA playoffs, that is a huge, huge feat. And Giannis and the Bucks should be commended. Because, again, at the end of the day, I thought that each one of these matchups, each one of these games was going to come down to the wire, and it would be between Kevin Durant and Chris Middleton, who's going to close. And if you're talking about Chris Middleton or Kevin Durant closing at the end of the game, I was leaning towards KD, but again, that was under the assumption that he would have his supporting cast. And Giannis 50 minutes, Middleton 50 minutes, Durant played 53 minutes. These guys were gassed and ridden all the way all the way down to the end. And the bottom line is this was a legacy saving and winning win for Giannis, because if he loses this game, this iteration of the Bucks might be over. Completely, there'd be a complete overhaul and complete change going into next season. Speaking of complete overhauls next season and sticking with the NBA playoffs, there was a second Game 7 game that took place last night. The Atlanta Hawks and the Philadelphia 76ers. The Atlanta Hawks beat the 76ers in Game 7 at the Wells Fargo Center, 103 to 96. Let me first give credit to the Atlanta Hawks. This was a major road performance. They have been the road warriors this postseason. I believe that in 6 postseason games this year, they have won 4 of the 6. 4 of the 6 road games this postseason are the Atlanta Hawks. They were absolutely sensational down the stretch, closing out this game. Kevin Huerter with a season-high 27 points, hit the 3 clutch free throws down the stretch after he got fouled by Matisse Thybulle. That was a huge play for a guy who I loved coming out of Maryland. I thought he'd be the prototypical kind of 3-and-D guy, or at least a guy that can stretch the floor. He's about 6'8", shoots the lights out. That was a big-time performance. Gallinari chipped in 17 points off the bench, and even though Trae Young struggled 5 of 23, still scored 21 points and dished out 10 assists. This guy has proven to be a tremendous leader, to be the ultimate galvanizer for an Atlanta Hawks team that with him, he has scored at least 20 points in every single postseason game this year. The guy's averaging 28 points and 10 assists for the postseason is Trae Young. His assist-to-turnover ratio is stellar, like 120 to 40, about a 3-to-1. And him being hounded with the basketball all the time, it is absolutely sensational what he's been doing. And I just can't say enough about the job that Nate McMillan has done with this Atlanta Hawks team, taking over for Lloyd Pierce, who was fired back on March 1st. Hawks had a 14-20 record. They were the 11th seed in the Eastern Conference. And he has turned this organization around. The players have bought into him. They love him. And I always said from the get-go, even before Nate McMillan took over, even with Lloyd Pierce, that I was a big believer in the Atlanta Hawks. I thought they'd be my dark horse team to go far in the playoffs. And I said when they were facing off against the 76ers, this is a dangerous team. And when the 76ers lost game 1 at home, I knew they were in trouble. I knew this was going to be a 7-game series. I will admit, I thought the 76ers would win. But at no point did I feel comfortable in the 76ers' chances, especially with Joel Embiid hampered with that injury. This is a legitimate Hawks team that is deep, that plays confidently, that plays freely, that has a swagger to them about it. They talk trash, but they back it up. They're physical. They get in your face, and they don't shy away from the biggest moments. And on the road, ultimately, they were the ones down the stretch making all the plays. And so I first wanted to extend my appreciation and offer some praise to the Atlanta Hawks, because this was a team that no one expected to reach this position. Some pundits had them losing to the Knicks in the first round. I didn't see that happening, but no one necessarily predicted that they would have reached the Eastern Conference playoffs. So, not to mention their trolling was fantastic at the end of the game. John Collins wore a shirt with him dunking over Joel Embiid. The ultimate troll. The Atlanta Hawks social media team was fantastic. And I wanted to take this opportunity to extend my congratulations to the Atlanta Hawks. That's what I wanted today to be about. But unfortunately, that wasn't the lasting impression for me. That wasn't what I was left standing with. That wasn't my biggest takeaway. My biggest takeaway was this result was the culmination of one of the most embarrassing series losses by the Philadelphia 76ers. That was an absolutely embarrassing series loss by the Philadelphia 76ers. It's one thing to lose in game 7 and to lose a 7-game series where every single game is teetering, going back and forth, leads are vacillating, and there are many lead changes, and it's nip and tuck through the end. This was a 76ers team that was up 2-1. They had a 26-point lead at home in game 5 that they blew. They had an 18-point lead on the road in game 4 that they blew. And find themselves in position of having to try and close out this team at home in game 7. And to me, not only do you lose 3 of 4 home games in this playoffs, in this series against the Atlanta Hawks. They lost 3 of 4 at home at the Wells Fargo Center. What did we talk about leading up to the playoffs? How important the 1 and the 2 seeds were. Because for months, everyone was talking about, well, which team is going to be able to avoid the Milwaukee Bucks in the first round? Is it going to be the 76ers or the Nets? Which team's going to receive the number 1 seed and get a chance to face the Knicks or the Hawks in the second round and get to avoid the Milwaukee Bucks? That was the storyline coming into this playoffs. Over and over again, we were discussing that, and the irony is the two teams that were both jockeying for the number 1 seed to avoid the Milwaukee Bucks ended up losing. And the Atlanta Hawks come out of nowhere, catch the 76ers off guard, expose their biggest flaws and deficiencies, and they shock them. And so I don't want to absolutely crush every single player on the 76ers, because I thought that Seth Curry was fantastic. He was the second most consistent player, the second best player for the 76ers this series. I didn't think there's any blame that should be directed in his way. And to be quite honest, I think that Joel Embiid was fantastic as well. The guy is laboring through a torn MCL, torn meniscus in his knee, for crying out loud. The guy's 7'1", 280 pounds, and he was averaging this postseason 28 points, 10.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists, over 50% from the floor, 39% from three, 85% from the free throw line, to go along with 1.5 blocks. And against the Hawks, those numbers ticked up. 30 points per game, 13 rebounds, 4 assists. The percentages were a little bit down, but the production was still there. And so I know that people are wanting to crush Joel Embiid and tear him a new one for the late turnover in Game 7, for the 2 missed free throws in Game 5, for shooting a bunch of threes last night. Even though he shot 40%, he made 2 of 5, and wanting him to get his behind on the block and play bully ball. And those are all valid. I understand that. And he could have elevated his game even more, but he wasn't the biggest liability for the 76ers. If it was not for his performances, I mean, the guy, again, averaged 30 points per game in this series. If it wasn't for him producing night in and night out, the 76ers may have lost this series in 5 games. So I don't want to absolutely throw Joel Embiid under the bus, not to absolve him of all the blame. There's no question that in some timely spots, he needed to step up and make some plays. But he was not the biggest impediment to this team's success. He was an absolute leader. He set the tone, battling through injuries, not making excuses. And if there was ever a player that had an opportunity and had a legitimate and valid excuse to not be playing well, it was Embiid. Playing through a torn meniscus. The biggest disappointment was Ben Simmons. Ben, 4 points in Game 7. You don't even attempt a wide open dunk when you spin off the defender, off Gallinari, right in the middle of the paint. No one's around you. You give up an open dunk to try and dish it to Matisse Thybulle, who's fouled. Not even Joel Embiid. He didn't even know how to sum it up or how to react to it in the postgame conference. They asked him, what do you think was the turning point of the game? He said, I don't really know how to answer that, other than there was a moment when we had an open shot and we gave it up and we only scored 1 free throw. Clearly alluding to that unattempted dunk by Ben Simmons. This series, Ben Simmons was averaging 10 points, 6 rebounds, and 9 assists. He shot fewer than 6 shot attempts in 4 games. He scored under 10 points in 4 of the 7 games this postseason. And he didn't attempt a shot in the fourth quarter in 5 of those 7 games. This is Ben Simmons. This is your 3-time All-Star. This is a guy that you're paying 5 years, $177 million to. Ben Simmons. And I'm just watching this game and thinking to myself, here you have a guy who's supposed to be the second best player on the team. And for the series, he's shooting 15 of 44 from the free throw line, 33%, shot 34% this postseason. That was the worst percentage from the free throw line in NBA history, with at least 70 attempts by Ben Simmons. And I just think about, okay, yes, he did dish out 13 assists. He did defend well, limiting Trae Young to 5 of 23 shooting. But the 76ers aren't paying you that much money to be passive in a Game 7, to pass up open dunks. They're not paying you that much money just to defend and shoot 34% from the free throw line. They're paying you to produce 20-point triple-doubles like he's capable of doing. And I still believe that in a different environment with his own team, Ben Simmons can still flourish and thrive. But this experiment is over. This experiment is over. We've seen enough between him and Joel Embiid, and it doesn't work. It just simply does not work. And he's got to be traded. I think that's the only option. Later in this week, I'll start to preview some potential trade destinations for him that they can look into But this experiment is over. And then Doc Rivers. I love Doc Rivers. I absolutely adore Doc Rivers. I think he's one of the best coaches in the NBA. He doesn't look good this morning either because some message that he's trying to reinforce in the huddles in the fourth quarter just isn't syncing with his teams. It's just simply not syncing with his players. And it's hard to pinpoint exactly what it is, but we know his track record in the postseason with blowing big leads. We saw it with the Clippers last year. We saw it again this year, up 2-1. Now, last year I defended him because I thought that he shouldn't have taken the brunt of the criticism, that I think the players had to be held more accountable for their shortfalls. And this year, while I do believe that the players deserve to be held accountable, there is something to be said for being able to inspire and evoke the best out of your players and elicit the best types of responses and performances out of your players. And for whatever reason, he wasn't able to summon that from every single player. Seth Curry, yeah, he did. But I just was left standing there thinking, how, if you're this compilation of players, this roster is so much better than the Atlanta Hawks from top to bottom. They've got the better star player. They've got the deeper team at the moment. We thought they had the better coach. You've got home court advantage and you lose 3 out of 4 games at home. He's got to be able to make more adjustments is the bottom line. And then to make things worse, to add insult to injury, you look over in the other conference and your former assistant Ty Lue is taking the Clippers, who you were just the coach of last year, to the Western Conference without Kawhi Leonard. So just embarrassing if you're the Philadelphia 76ers, and they've got to look in the mirror really hard this summer, this postseason, and this offseason, rather. They got to sit down Ben Simmons, get him to shoot, and then trade him. Get him to shoot and then trade him to try and raise back up his equity. Embarrassing. Just a shame. Just an absolute shame that they lost. But big shout out to the Atlanta Hawks. Again, they were fantastic down the stretch. I know that the Western Conference Finals just took place. Game 1 took place yesterday between the Clippers and the Suns, and I will touch on that in a moment. But I have to react first to Game 6 between the Clippers and the Jazz because it took place Friday night. This is Monday. No one's really had a chance to unpack everything that took place. And this Clippers team knocks off the Utah Jazz, the best record in the NBA, the number 1 seed, in one of the most perplexing manners I've ever witnessed. They trailed by 22 points at the half. Utah was rolling. They hit 12 3-pointers in the first half. Jordan Clarkson went off for 21 points in the first half, scored 17 straight for the Jazz to cap off a 21-2 run at the end of the first half. Donovan Mitchell was cooking. He ended up finishing the game with 39 points, 9 rebounds, 9 assists, made 9 of 15 3-pointers was Donovan Mitchell. This game, the writing on the wall was that the Utah Jazz were going to blow out the Clippers in Game 6, return to Game 7, and we'll see what happens. That's what it appeared. And the first bucket of the third quarter, 3-pointer from Donovan Mitchell, puts him up 25. And then all of a sudden, Utah Jazz collapse and the Clippers prevail. You look up at the scoreboard, Donovan Mitchell was obviously gassed. He was faltering down the stretch, unfortunately, still hobbled by that ankle injury. And the Clippers pulled off perhaps the most shocking result of this postseason. And I've said this before about the Clippers. They are the most befuddling, mind-boggling team to try and evaluate this postseason. Really, you could argue the last 2 years. Because we all thought this team was dead in the water. And all of a sudden, we thought they were down for the count, and they resurfaced and got up off the mat multiple times. They obviously trailed not only in this game by 22 at the half, but you go into game 5 without Kawhi Leonard. You win that game on the road. You go back to the series against Dallas. You lose your first 2 games at home. You're trailing 3-2 going to Dallas. You win that game. You win a game 7. You become the first team ever to come back from 2-0 deficits to start the series, and you reach the Western Conference Finals for the first time in your organization's 51 years. You make history that way, and it's all sparked by a second-year player who was drafted 48th overall out of Florida State in Terrence Mann. Terrence Mann drops 39 points, makes 15 of 21 shots, 7 of 10 from the three-point line. He could not miss in this ball game. Paul George chips in, was fantastic, 28, 9, and 8. Reggie Jackson has been actually surprisingly consistent on offense, 27 points, 10 assists. Nick Batum with 16, he chipped in. The entire effort from the Clippers to rally from 25 points down and then take a 10-point lead, 116-106. Midway through the fourth quarter, they outscored the Utah Jazz 81-47 in the second half. They made 14 of 19 three-point shots in the second half. They were 30 of 42 from the floor in the second half. And unfortunately, this has kind of been the motif for the Utah Jazz, blowing second half leads in the postseason. We obviously saw their debacle last year in the bubble. They led 3-1 against the Denver Nuggets. They blew that series. And now we see it again. And I still love Donovan Mitchell. And I love Quinn Snyder. I like this team, but they fell apart once again. And I remember thinking to myself that I truly hated, even as a Lakers fan, I hated the fact that injuries were playing such a crucial role in determining the outcomes of so many of these series. And when Kawhi Leonard went down, I truly hated that because we were robbed as NBA fans of seeing the best players on the biggest stages. And again, even though I wasn't necessarily rooting for the Clippers, I was rooting for an even matchup and a healthy matchup between two teams to really see. I wanted the Utah Jazz to beat the Clippers at full strength. And if the Clippers were going to fall down, I didn't want it to be because Kawhi Leonard was injured. And to their credit, there are a lot of sports organizations that would have just crumbled. They crumbled last year. And there are a lot of franchises that kind of are grouped together and clustered into this group of organizations that have annual shortcomings in the postseason, that are just always marred with either controversy or postseason struggles. And there are certain franchises where you legitimately think to yourself, there is a black cat running around this organization. And they're just infecting everyone with some virus. And the Clippers were one of those organizations. You think back to the number of recent examples in which they were so close on the cusp of reaching the Western Conference Finals and they came short. 2015 against the Houston Rockets, they lead 3-2 up by 19 points late in the third quarter at home, and then you have Josh Smith and Corey Brewer going off with James Harden and Dwight Howard on the bench to win that game for you in Game 6, get the series back to Houston, and you win Game 7. In 2014, against OKC on the road, Chris Paul, a member of the Clippers, turns the ball over twice in the final 17 seconds. Thunder end up getting fouled on a three-point attempt. Russell Westbrook makes all 3 free throws, and you win 105-104 in a crucial Game 5 on the road that would have put the Clippers up 3-2 with a chance to close out the series back in LA in Game 6. Obviously, last year against the Nuggets, up 3-1. There are countless examples of ways in which this team has clearly been cursed. And then They seem to not get a break with Kawhi Leonard's injury. And despite all that, they rise through the ashes. They rise through the ashes. They prevail on the road. They overcome history. And to their credit, even as a Lakers fan, I can see there is nothing negative I can say about the Clippers. Sure, they may have taken a more circuitous route, but what we saw was Paul George actually start to embody his playoff P moniker, and the Clippers able to avoid their ignominious playoff track record of being awful in the postseason and being a disgrace. They avoided that. And so the one thing that I will say about the Clippers is this year, and I do think Ty Lue deserves a ton of credit. He should be extolled today and throughout this entire series. And the job that he's done with this franchise in the one season he's been there, his influence has rubbed off on them. He's been absolutely sensational. But I will say this, it is amazing to me what a lack of expectations can do for a team. It's amazing what you see from teams when there isn't any pressure, when there are no expectations heaped onto them. Game 5 against the Utah Jazz on the road was the first game the Clippers have played in perhaps the last 8 years in the postseason with legitimately no playoff pressure. No one was expecting them to win. They were playing with house money. Nothing to lose. And when I look at this Clippers team, that was literally the first game since before the Chris Paul era, since before he was traded, that you could honestly say this team wasn't facing any pressure. In Game 5, sure, there was some pressure in Game 6, but still no Kawhi Leonard, no expectations. And it's just amazing to me how much of a load that can just, how cumbersome that can be when you have that pressure. And then when you take off that pressure, how liberating that can be for a team. And I give major credit to the Clippers because they've answered the call. It hasn't been in the ways that we maybe as NBA fans would have liked, but they're at this point. And right now, I give them a solid chance against the Phoenix Suns. And that's how I'll transition to now is when I looked at Game 1 against the Phoenix Suns and the Clippers, which took place yesterday, to be honest, from my point of view, from my vantage point, I don't think there's so much that you can glean from Game 1 from the perspective of this team is dead in the water. I came away from Game 1 thinking to myself, the Clippers have a chance. I'm not going to just write them off. I'm not going to count them out right now just because they've got no Kawhi Leonard. Even if Chris Paul comes back, the mental fortitude that I've seen, Paul George has clearly turned a corner, dropping 34 points. He was great. Reggie Jackson with another 24 points. From my vantage point, watching Game 1, the fact that the Clippers, after just playing a highly emotional and intense, hard-fought series against the Utah Jazz just 36 hours ago, to come back on the road like we've seen over the last 2 series on the road in Game 1, and not only hold their own, but compete till the bitter end, and force Devin Booker to put up a 40-point triple-double just to win one game at home, barely. I think if you're the Clippers this morning, you're waking up thinking to yourself, our game plan worked pretty well, and we barely had any time to prep for the Phoenix Suns. Because, yes, Phoenix won 120 to 114, but if you're the Clippers, you're looking at that box score saying to yourself, we were down by 10 points, 116 to 106. With about 2.5 minutes left. And next thing you know, Terrence Mann hits a three-pointer, and it's a 114 to 116 game with 22 seconds left. The margins that they closed the gap, the margin for error that they had to execute on down the stretch was phenomenal to me. And when I think about the Clippers, they could have easily just packed it in that spot. You coming off a 6-game series, You're emotionally gassed. It was taxing. You're playing on the road in a hostile environment. The other team is well rested. They haven't played a game in over a week. Yes, there's no Chris Paul, but you got Devin Booker cooking you. They could have packed it in, and they didn't. So I give them a lot of credit. They should be in pretty good spirits as they were in the postgame. But I do love what I'm seeing out of Devin Booker and this Phoenix Suns team. And even though I'm not going to count out the Clippers at the end of the day, if this series is to continue with these current rosters, Clippers playing without Kawhi, Phoenix Suns without Chris Paul, they'll take that series. They will take that matchup in a heartbeat. Because as good as Chris Paul is, I think that the talent around him is better than the talent on the Clippers without Kawhi. And Devin Booker torched them, 40 points, 13 rebounds, 11 assists, his first playoff triple-double. He was sensational, hitting from the mid-range, curling off screens, hitting three-pointers, driving to the basket. And this has been kind of this coming out party for Devin Booker this postseason. He scored 11 points in the fourth quarter, but this is what was most impressive watching Devin Booker yesterday, because everyone's only characterized him as a scorer. Well, no Chris Paul. He takes over the point guard duties because Cameron Payne isn't in the ball game late down the stretch. And Devin Booker recorded 4 assists in the fourth quarter. He scored or assisted on 43 of Phoenix's final 50 points in the ball game. Devin Booker, a guy who we all thought just shot the ball, just scored the basketball. In the second half, so I mentioned he had 40 points, 13 rebounds, 11 assists. In the second half, he scored 29 of those 40 points, had 7 of those 13 rebounds, had 8 of those 11 assists, all in the second half. And this postseason, 28 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists. He's been playing extremely, extremely well. The second 40-plus point performance this postseason, second 40-plus point game this postseason. DeAndre Ayton has been stepping up. He's been great. 20 points, 9 rebounds. He's coming into his own. He's going to have to play. He's first of all, he's going to have to play big in this game, but he's also going to have the advantage every single time because of Ivica Zubac and DeMarcus Cousins or Nicholas Batum or Marcus Morris, whoever they end up putting on him, isn't going to be able to do anything about it. He's going to have that advantage every single time. And that was really the only negative for the Clippers, actually. Forgot to add is Marcus Morris hurt his knee. But outside of that, this is shaping out to be a great, grueling 7-game series. I do think this will go the distance. Whether Kawhi is playing, whether Chris Paul is playing, I think this series will go the distance. But I was just very impressed, obviously, with the individual performances of Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton. And it was classy that they FaceTimed Chris Paul walking in the tunnel back to the locker room. But I came away with this feeling pretty optimistic if you're a Clippers fan, to be honest. So while I like this series going to Phoenix, I like Phoenix Suns winning this series in 7 games. I think it's going to go the distance. I truly do. Morning Joe right here, J&J Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube every Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Thank you so much for joining me on a Monday morning. And I did want to recap the U.S. Open in golf. The championship took place yesterday. Such a kind of warm and fuzzy feeling when you're watching golf on a Sunday afternoon, especially with championship season. The U.S. Open took place, and Jon Rahm won the U.S. Open, becoming the first Spanish golfer to win the U.S. Open. He also claimed his first major title of his professional career. A big shout out to him. And what I love about sports is narratives. We talk about narratives all the time. Sports is all about narratives. We love good narratives, right? And the last time that the U.S. Open was played at Torrey Pines in San Diego was 2008, and that was when Tiger Woods won the U.S. Open on a fractured leg. It was an absolutely sensational performance. And then you add on top of that, so you have that the last time the tournament was hosted in this spot. You had a memorable moment with Tiger Woods. Now you fast forward 13 years later. It's on Father's Day. This is the first time that Jon Rahm is playing on Father's Day as a father. Just gave birth to a 10-week-old son, Kepka. Not Kepka, sorry, apologies. The name is Kepa, apologies. Name is Kepa, who's a 10-week-old son. His wife's in attendance. His son's in attendance. His father flew out to Spain, or from Spain, rather, to be here to support him. And the backdrop behind all this is just 2 weeks prior at a tournament at the Memorial Golf Tournament. He had a 6-shot lead and was primed to win the event. And then at the very end, at the conclusion of his final round, he was informed that he had tested positive for COVID and was forced to be disqualified and withdraw from the tournament, even though he was about to win with a 6-shot lead at Memorial. That's the backdrop. Father's Day, 10-week-old son in attendance. Father flies in from Spain. And you come up with maybe 2 of the clutchest birdies on the 17th and 18th holes at the U.S. Open, maybe ever. This was the first time he did make history with those 2 birdies. This was the first time that a player has hit 2 birdies in the final 2 holes at the U.S. Open and win by 1 shot ever in the 120 editions of the U.S. Open. Let that sink in. And first of all, the birdies that he hit, his shot, his approach shot out of the bunker to land in the green on 17, to then hit a 25-foot birdie putt that was moving from left to right to drop in there, was absolutely clutch. And then on 18, he hits an 18-foot birdie putt that has to bend in with the crowd roaring, with a purse of $12 million, with $12 million riding on an 18-foot putt. You think you're stressed out playing a round of golf with no stakes at your local country club, and you're just trying to set a personal record for yourself? Imagine having $12 million riding on an 18-foot birdie putt with the world watching, with your first major title on the line. The stakes could not have been higher for him, and he came through. He was absolutely sensational, and to me, he obviously finished the round 4 under par, shooting a 67. Those 2 clutch holes were tremendous, but he was great the entire tournament, and especially the final round. All of his drivers were right in the middle of the fairway. He was working out of the bunker on a lot of shots, and his approach shots were great, and his ability to read the greens and to putt. This was the best he's putted in his career. The best time he's ever putted in his career. And this is the difference between professional golfers and amateur golfers. It's not the driver. It's not the approach shot. It's the putting. It's their ability to read the greens, to read the ridges, to follow the ridges, how hard to hit those putts. Those are such stressful shots to make. And for his ability to come through like that, and again, all the drivers were clean, right down the middle of the fairway. His putting was on point. It was an absolute sensational performance by him. And this was one of those rare years where, interestingly enough, entering the final round, while it's true there were 6 players that were kind of jockeying for the number 1, for the top of the leaderboard, and had a chance, about 6 different players had a chance to win entering the final round, and 10 players were separated by a single shot. Yet down the stretch of the final round, while all this chaos ensued, Jon Rahm was the only guy to actually exceed some of these and go above and beyond this chaos. And his performance down the stretch, we obviously know that there were 4 guys that were in contention that ended up going double bogey in the back 9. And his ability to rise to the occasion and just stay composed, stay within himself, stay locked in, unconcerned with what was going on around him, and to win yesterday in the fashion that he did. The winds were blowing like crazy, and his shots were tremendous. And he was down a shot to Louis Oosthuizen and hits the clutch birdie at 17, ties it at -5, takes the lead at -6. Oosthuizen bogeys, is 2 back now, -4, needing an eagle putt just to send it to the playoff. And just a special moment for him and his family, and a big shout out to Jon Rahm. And congratulations, becoming the first Spanish golfer to win a major, and for him personally claiming his first ever major championship. And that's how we will transition to my final topic of the day, Malkin's Moments, one of my favorite segments of the show, recognizing some great performances from this past weekend and week. And as I just talked about, the first Malkin's Moment goes to Jon Rahm, claiming his first major title on the tour in golf, winning the U.S. Open Championship. He's won about 5 other PGA Tour championships, but none were majors. He's won championships in Europe, but again, none have been a major, and he became the first Spanish golfer to win the U.S. Open Championship. So big shout out to Jon Rahm. A big shout out to Trae Young for leading the Atlanta Hawks to just their second Eastern Conference Finals in 50 years. The last time they reached the conference finals came in 2015 when they were swept by the Cleveland Cavaliers and LeBron James. That was when Mike Budenholzer was the coach, with Kyle Korver and Al Horford and Paul Millsap and Jeff Teague, that big four, and Trae Young, and that happened in 2015. Prior to that, the Hawks hadn't reached the Eastern Conference Finals since the 1969-1970 season, in which they ultimately lost to the Lakers in that divisional round, a divisional matchup. At the time, there was only one matchup, and the Lakers were still in their division somehow. Trae Young not only individually performed well, he became the first Atlanta Hawk and the first player to score 20 points and dish out 10 assists on the road in a Game 7 since Doc Rivers did it with the Atlanta Hawks, which is another in really kind of coincidental and serendipitous type of stat. And prior to Sunday, the Hawks were 0-9 in Game 7s on the road. That mark was the worst in NBA history. And Nate McMillan, their head coach, became just the 7th coach in NBA history to take over a team mid-season and actually take them to at least the conference championship. Tyronn Lue did it with the Cavs in 2016. Pat Riley did it with the Lakers in 2006, or in 1982, apologies. But also with the Miami Heat in 2006 with Dwayne Wade. And then Paul Westhead did it with the Lakers in 1980. And all those teams actually were led to the NBA championship. And finally, with the Hawks, staying with the Hawks too, this was the first time, or they're just the second team in the current playoff format since 1984 to reach the conference finals with no all-stars on their roster. That's what's amazing about this. Big shout out to the Atlanta Hawks. 2 more for you, and then I'll let you go. Devin Booker deserves a Malkin's moment, recording his first ever playoff triple-double. 40 points, 13 rebounds, 11 assists to lead the Suns to a Game 1 win over the Clippers, 120-114 in the Western Conference Finals. And I've talked about Devin Booker just really stepping up to the moment. He became just the 4th player to record a 40-point triple-double in the conference finals, and is just the 6th player in NBA history to record multiple 40-point games in their playoff debut. Luka Doncic has done it, LeBron James, Bob McAdoo, Rick Barry, and Wilt Chamberlain. And Booker is the first Suns player since Steve Nash to put up a triple-double in the postseason. That is not something that we would have expected to have said about Devin Booker prior to this postseason. Everyone thought he just shoots a bunch of shots, but he's showing that he's a much more well-rounded player, that he possesses a whole array of skill sets. And actually, I had a third one. So Clippers, big shout out to them for making their franchise history, reaching the Western Conference Finals for the first time in franchise history in 51 years in their existence. They finally got that proverbial monkey off their back, and they posted the largest comeback victory in a series-clinching win, rallying back from a 25-point deficit in the last 25 years. Down 25 points early in the third quarter, and they're the first team in NBA history to rally from 2-0 deficits in the same postseason and ultimately win. Big shout out to them. Terrence Mann, again, 39 points, 15 of 21, shooting 7 of 10 from the three-point line. Became just the third player in franchise history to make at least 7 threes in a postseason game. And since 1997, Terrence Mann is the only player in franchise history to score 20 points in a single quarter. He scored 20 points in the third quarter. Big shout out to Terrence Mann. And finally, last one, American track and field star Allison Felix qualified for the Olympics for her fifth Olympics of her career. She already has 9 medals, 6 gold medals, and right now it appears that she is qualified for the 400-meter relay, could participate in some other events as well. That would tie her. That would perhaps give her the option and the opportunity of tying Carl Lewis's all-time record for the most medals won at the Olympics for a female athlete. So big shout out. She's just a decorated athlete, as Allison Felix. Congrats to her, and congrats to everyone else on a tremendous season. Wow. What a jam-packed sports weekend this was. What a jam-packed sports weekend. Wednesday, make sure to tune in Wednesday. I have a special guest that's going to be talking about soccer, the culture in the U.S., and much more. It's a tremendous interview that's coming up on Wednesday with a former pro soccer player. I cannot wait to bring him on. I'm going to post some promotions on social media. Make sure to check that out. Make sure to subscribe and like my YouTube page, Morning Joe with Jonah Malkin. Follow me on Twitter, on Instagram, all that jazz. And as always, have a lovely rest of your morning.